Tonight on Reporting Scotland. Halving the rate of childhood obesity by 2030. New plans announced by the First Minister. The report, which says criminal gangs involved in feuds, violence and firearms pose an increased threat to public safety. The stress of modern life. 3/4 of Scots surveyed say they have felt overwhelmed or unable to cope.
I was on the verge of tears at some times. I'd be on a bus and surrounded by people, and I was almost at the edge of crying.
Also on the programme, ballot boxes behind bars. The MSP is calling for prisoners to be given the right to vote. And the Scotland manager says we've been moaning too long about the lack of good young talent. Now it's time to do something about it. Good evening. Nearly a third of Scottish school children are overweight. And today, the First Minister announced plans to halve rates of childhood obesity by 2030. It's understood measures being considered include new laws to restrict supermarket junk food promotions. Here's our health correspondent, Lisa Summers.
At lunchtime today, plenty of unhealthy eating was going on. 14% of Scottish children are obese. That amounts to 112,000 children. 29% are classified as overweight.
First Minister, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
It was alongside the campaigning chef, Jamie Oliver, that the First Minister announced ambitious plans.
Scotland's got a good tradition and reputation in being bold when it comes to measures, sometimes controversial in the early days, to promote and improve public health. We've just, of course, introduced minimum unit pricing for alcohol. And given the implications of childhood obesity for people, not just in childhood, but later in life, I think it's now time to see governments in Scotland, across the UK and further afield be much bolder in tackling this as well.
There are plenty of challenges to overcome. 42% of children say they eat chips at least twice a week. 35% say they drink full-fat fizzy drinks at least once a day. Jamie Oliver was all for setting a target, but wants to see actions after the words.
The cost of not joining the dot is too high now. I think the clarity about how the healthcare system is being compromised, obesity, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, our older communities, this is one big old pot of the same kind of story. We have to, and what Mrs Sturgeon is saying she's going to do, is invest more focus across her powers on protecting Scottish children.
The government has already outlined proposals to ban junk food and multi-buy promotions. It could be the first part of the UK to do this, but it will take some time. They also want to encourage increased physical activity levels. Parents at this primary school say a broad range of measures is the way forward.
It's just finding the balance of good things and bad things for children to eat. I think things like Happy Meals should be healthier. They should have more vegetables and things in them. See, when we're saying kids shouldn't be a little bit overweight, and this, all we're doing is creating negative body images for them, and we're telling them they shouldn't enjoy their food.
Childhood obesity levels have remained fairly stagnant in the last 20 years, but today was a signal of intent to turn things around. Full details of the plans will come in an obesity strategy due to be published in the coming weeks. Lisa Summers, Reporting Scotland.
Feuds and rivalries between 6 criminal gangs in Scotland with access to firearms have increased the risk to the general public. That's one of the findings of a study by the UK's National Crime Agency, which says organised crime groups are now willing to use their weapons in public places. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Riva Alderson, reports.
Police tapes sealing off a violent crime scene. Increasingly, it seems a common sight in the west of Scotland. There's been a catalogue of gang-related shootings in the past 18 months. In November 2016, drug dealer Ewan Johnston died, shot at traffic lights on Glasgow's south side. 2 months later, a shooting outside a school in Pennylee. In March last year, another shooting outside a school, this time in Shawlands. A 22-year-old shot dead in Castlemilk last July. 3 months ago, a shooting in Cambuslang, and last month, Kenny Riley shot dead at traffic lights in Maryhill. But does this mean our streets are less safe? Veteran crime reporter Ron Mackay says many of these incidents have been connected to 2 crime families who've been attacking each other for 20 years.
And it shows no signs of stopping. And the methods of violence are getting more and more extreme. tracking somebody at traffic lights and shooting them through a window in a passenger seat when there's some innocent driving the car is it's a big step up.
Today's report from the UK National Crime Agency says there were 164 crime gangs in Scotland. Police say that number's come down since the figure was compiled. Almost 3,300 individuals are being investigated. And police say last year they made 1,300 gang-related arrests and claim 89 of these were leaders of organised crime groups. Police say they're confident they're making progress.
The public's minds will go towards those acts of violence that they've seen in recent times, and what I would say is that is very much based on a small group of organised crime groups who are targeting each other. They are isolated attacks, but we're right to be concerned about the wider public safety, and again we think we've had a robust investigation in relation to those incidents.
Organised crime is increasingly sophisticated, but police say they're using equally sophisticated tools here at the Scottish Crime Campus to disrupt criminal activities. The concern remains that continuing feuds pose a threat of harm, a risk heightened by gangs' access to firearms, including automatic weapons. Rival Alderson reporting, Scotland.
Police investigating the death of a woman in Perthshire say they're now treating it as suspicious. The body of 22-year-old Annalise Johnson from Ardrossan in Ayrshire was found in woods near Auchterarder last Thursday. Police are appealing for information, including tracing a silver Ford Galaxy she was driving.
This is not just a run-of-the-mill death out in the countryside. There's more elements to this that we've really got to drill into. There's a complex scene that we're working our way through with forensic examinations.
Mental health campaigners are calling for politicians to do more to alleviate stress in society. It comes after 3/4 of Scots who responded to a study said they felt overwhelmed or unable to cope at some point in the last year. At the start of Mental Health Awareness Week, we've been hearing from some of those affected by stress and those offering help.
I just left a job that I really enjoyed. It came at the same time as some domestic problems. I was in a relationship, a very long-term relationship, which unfortunately came to an end. It just sort of built up, and so stress became anxiety, because anxiety is stressing about stress. I was on the verge of tears at some times. You know, I'd be on a bus and surrounded by people, and I would almost at the edge of crying.
We need to start taking stress seriously, because stress can lead to mental health problems like depression and anxiety. So if we can tackle stress, we can tackle one of the many root causes of mental health problems.
We're trying to prevent mental ill health, and we want to deliver early intervention. So people can go to their GP, but they can also come directly to an occupational therapist, and we will talk to them about the things that matter to them in their everyday life and look at strategies that they can make use of to get back to their everyday life, work and hobbies.
Some people respond well, and they sit and they listen, and they're kind, but some people just get bored of it. And sometimes people you think are your friends just sort of drift off. If I were to recommend anything, it would be that we have a culture where we talk about these sort of things more, because prevention is much cheaper than any of the cures that are available.
4 teenagers have been charged with assault after a video of an attack in Stenhousemuir was circulated on social media. It showed several girls attacking another girl, pulling her to the ground by the hair and kicking her face several times. Police have said the charges relate to incidents that took place at various locations earlier this month. The Scottish Prison Service says there are no plans to return young offenders to HMP Grampian in Peterhead. The purpose-built super jail opened in 2014, but weeks later a riot broke out, resulting in all youths being transferred to Polmont in Falkirk. The wing is still lying empty. The Prison Service says there are a wider range of opportunities at Polmont, and a separate young offenders regime might not be sustainable at Grampian. Well, meanwhile, should prisoners be allowed to vote in Scottish and local elections? Well, a committee at Holyrood is recommending they should, arguing it would help with their rehabilitation. But others argue offenders serving custodial sentences shouldn't be given the right. Andrew Black reports.
Ashley Scotland is a survivor of rape and domestic abuse. Now she supports people who've suffered the same kind of trauma. When it comes to giving prisoners the right to vote, Ashley believes the current approach is the right one.
I'm all for people being rehabilitated, 100%, but what needs to happen first is you need to go and serve your time. If you're going to commit a crime, then you need to be prepared to forego your responsibilities, and that includes your right to vote.
Some prisoners in Scotland can vote right now, those on remand awaiting trial or serving a community sentence on a tag. But today a majority of MSPs on the Scottish Parliament's Cross-Party Equalities Committee said that right should be extended to those serving custodial sentences. Those who support allowing prisoners to vote say it would help rehabilitate criminals, which is a key aim of the justice system.
What we should be trying to do in prisons and in the administration of any sentence is prepare people to live after release in a responsible way. And one key aspect of being a responsible citizen in a democracy is to vote and to be part of political processes. So I think, in fact, political education and political participation in prisons is a critical part of that wider project.
But giving the vote to criminals who've been convicted of crimes like murder is still a politically sensitive issue. The Scottish Greens and Liberal Democrats back the move, but crucially the Scottish Government says it has no plans to let all prisoners vote. That means, for now at least, no change in the current policy. Andrew Black, reporting Scotland.
It's just after 20 to 7, a reminder of tonight's main story. Nicola Sturgeon enlists some celebrity help as she announces plans to halve the rate of childhood obesity in Scotland by 2030. And still to come, photographs showing a century of Scottish life and described as one of the most significant collections in decades. Holyrood will be asked to refuse consent for the EU withdrawal bill in a vote tomorrow. It's a key moment in a prolonged row over how Brexit will impact on devolved powers. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
Hold your head up, don't give up, no, no.
It was a bad weekend for the UK in Europe. Not quite nil point in Lisbon, but our Eurovision entry tanked. In London, ministers are still wrangling with one another over what form Brexit should take.
I do think that it's important that we have these debates in private.
And they're facing resistance in Edinburgh too. In a vote here at Holyrood tomorrow, MSPs are expected to refuse their consent for the UK government's EU withdrawal bill, because they say it could prevent them from passing laws in devolved areas like fishing, farming and food safety.
If the UK government gets its way, they will be able to impose arrangements on Scotland, even although these things are part of the responsibility of the Scottish Parliament, and they'll be able to do so without our consent, and I don't think that is acceptable.
But experts say the UK government is legally entitled to go ahead with any law affecting devolved powers without Holyrood's consent, even though it has not done so before.
It does remind us that at the end of the day, Westminster still is supreme. But it does raise questions about the status of this Sewell Convention. It was bound to come up sometime. It says that Westminster will not normally legislate in devolved areas without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. It doesn't say what is meant by normally, and it doesn't say what will happen if it does go ahead anyway.
So what's the UK government thinking?
What the UK government has proposed is a very reasonable solution to something that wasn't anticipated at the time of devolution, something which doesn't in any way affect the existing devolution settlement, and something in fact which will deliver more powers and responsibilities to the Scottish Parliament when we leave the EU.
Name 2 Scottish MEPs.
A tricky European quiz for children visiting Holyrood today, and tomorrow those sitting here will pose an even tougher question. If Holyrood rejects Brexit legislation, will Westminster take heed or not? Glenn Campbell, reporting Scotland.
Well, let's pose that very question to our political correspondent David Porter, who's at Westminster. David, will it make any difference?
I don't think it will, Jackie. I think whatever happens at Holyrood tomorrow, the EU withdrawal bill, which is currently in the House of Lords behind me, will continue its passage at Westminster. Both the UK and the Scottish governments will be disappointed by what has happened, but not surprised. As Len said, they talked, but they did not manage to find enough common ground to have a situation whereby the Scottish government could recommend to the Holyrood Parliament that it should support the legislation. So what we think will happen tomorrow at Holyrood, Holyrood will not give its backing. The UK government will probably go ahead with the EU withdrawal bill. Inevitably, that will lead to some people talking about a constitutional crisis. And while we're talking about differences on the Brexit legislation, it is also worth remembering that the Scottish and the UK governments are preparing to square up against each other in the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court, as to whether the Scottish Parliament has the legal authority to bring about its own Brexit bill, the so-called continuity bill. We have learnt tonight that that hearing will take place towards the end of July, and that will be watched very closely, not just by the lawyers, but by the politicians as well.
David Porter, thank you. Stalking has been a crime here since 2010, but there's been a call today for victims to be given greater protection. An MSP is bringing forward a members' bill which would give police new powers to apply to the courts for a protection order on behalf of a victim. Andrew Anderson can tell us more.
Anne Moulds was a victim of stalking. The abuse she suffered went on for 2 years. Her stalker sent her a torrent of letters, photographs and other items through the post.
They're living with constant stress, fear, anxiety. I lost weight, my hair fell out, suffering other health conditions. I actually didn't think I was going to survive this. Even out with being attacked, my health was deteriorating so badly. I thought I was probably going to have a heart attack or a stroke at some point.
Anne went on to found the campaign group Action Against Stalking, and in 2010 it was made a crime in Scotland. But agencies who offer help and advice to victims say stalking remains a big problem, with abusers turning to new technology as a weapon of harassment.
The development of digital technology, internet, mobile phone, has expanded the way in which people are experiencing stalking behaviours, and I think our legislation hasn't necessarily kept up with all of that.
At the moment, unless a stalker is brought before the criminal courts, the only way their victim can try to stop the abuse is by taking out a civil action. Obtaining a non-harassment order can be a lengthy process, costing thousands of pounds. This MSP is bringing forward a members' bill to make it easier for victims to get that protection.
What this stalking prevention order would now do, it would allow the police to then apply for an order on the victim's behalf so that they don't then have the costs of going through the civil action themselves.
Campaigners say such a move would help protect victims of stalking at the earliest possible stage. Andrew Anderson, reporting Scotland.
Football. We've been moaning too long about the lack of good young talent. Now it's time to do something about it. Well, those are the thoughts of the Scotland manager, Alec McLeish. He's named 7 uncapped players in his latest squad for the upcoming friendlies in Peru and Mexico. Kerdin Itzan reports.
A lick of paint at Hampden as the National Stadium gets ready for the end of season showpiece. Saturday's Scottish Cup final isn't the main thing on this man's mind. After his first win as Scotland boss in Hungary,
and that's tucked home into the net by Phillips.
He's now selected a squad for the upcoming friendlies in Peru and Mexico.
We're the warm-up act for 2 teams who are highly motivated going to the World Cup finals. And we've got to work in these 2 games, both mentally and physically. And in terms of saying that we're not going over there as cannon fodder. You know, we want to be there and giving ourselves a good show, and also spoil their parties a wee bit.
Today's announcement here at the National Stadium was always likely to be as much about the players missing as the players picked. On the one hand, Celtic's Kieran Tierney, James Forrest and Callum McGregor have all been excused duty due to long seasons and the short break before Champions League qualifiers begin. Reaping the benefit, on the other hand, the likes of John Souttar, Lewis Stevenson and Lewis Morgan all get their chance to make their Scotland debuts.
Boys like this we have to encourage. We've been lamenting the fact over the last few years that we don't have enough talent coming out of the country. So this is when we have to start getting onto the encouragement side of things.
After sealing his move to the Scottish champions, winger Lewis Morgan is one of 3 Celtic players who do travel, along with midfielder Stuart Armstrong and defender Jack Hendry. There's also an unexpected return for the former Dundee United striker Johnny Russell, recalled 3 years after the last of his 4 caps. He now plays for Kansas City in America's major soccer league. We'll find out in just over a fortnight who gets the thumbs up, either to start or kickstart their international careers. Kerry Nidsan reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
And Rangers have made midfielder Scott Arfield their first signing under new manager Steven Gerrard. The Canada international has signed a 4-year deal at the Ibrox club after a 5-year spell with Premier League side Burnley. Now, an archive of more than 14,000 photographs spanning a century of Scottish life has been acquired by the National Galleries of Scotland and the National Library of Scotland. It's been described as one of the most significant collections in decades, and it cost £1 million. Our arts correspondent Pauline McLean has been to see it.
On the water, but the actual photograph is this tiny little head here. So they're having fun with this. This is probably
just a fraction of the 14,000 photos in this archive, offering a snapshot of Scottish life across a century, from the early days of photography to the 1940s. For both the National Galleries and the National Library of Scotland, it's a landmark acquisition.
It's filling in gaps, it's strengthening what we do have, and it's allowing us each to tell the story of Scottish photography, which of course was right at the beginnings of history of photography. So we were a real leader in this medium, and by this collection filling in those areas and being able to better tell the story is going to make for a really exciting moment for both collections.
The archive was built up by one man, a pharmacist from Aberdeenshire, who ran a chain of photo processing shops. When he sold the collection to a private buyer, the National Galleries and Library moved quickly. With support from the government, the lottery and the Art Fund, they raised the £1 million asking price.
It's very significant because we feel it's the last great photographic collection that's in private hands. And it's full of Scottish photographs, right from the 1840s to the 1940s. So all of us got behind it quite quickly, and there was a sense of urgency around it. We're all photographers, we've all got pictures, we've all got family albums, and this is in a sense is Scotland's family album that we're actually sharing with the whole of Scotland. So we're really excited about it and look forward to it.
A selection of the photos will be on display here in Edinburgh before touring the country next year, and it's hoped that eventually all 14,000 photographs will be digitised so that the whole country can get the chance to see this extraordinary photo archive. Pauline McLean, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Let's get a snapshot of the weather now from Christopher.
Jackie, thank you. Hello there, good evening to you. It was a lovely day for many of us, plenty of sunshine and blue sky, and plenty of lovely photos coming into us from our weather watchers. And in fact, the week ahead doesn't look too bad at all. High pressure in charge, so that means mostly dry. There'll be some sunshine, a bit of cloud around at times, the odd spot of light rain, but generally dry. Now, today we've had a bit more cloud towards the west coast and the Hebrides, and overnight that will drift its way east for a time, but many eastern areas staying clear. So temperatures in towns and cities there, but the countryside could be cooler than that. And we could see a little bit of ha just lapping onto these eastern shores as well. Tuesday, the one fly in the ointment this week. We've got a cold front moving its way eastwards. So tomorrow, a cloudier day, probably the cloudiest day of the week, the odd spot of light rain at times. Starts off dry and sunny in the east, plenty of sunshine here. In the west, after a bright start, the cloud building and edging its way eastwards. The odd spot of light rain or drizzle at times with that thickening cloud. But actually, by mid-afternoon, still quite pleasant despite those cloudier skies. Temperatures in the central belt, 16 to 18 Celsius. And starting to brighten up by this point through the Hebrides as well. Some sunshine coming through, a breeze increasing though. Come further east where we have the sunshine for most of the day, anything up to around 20 Celsius. And there you can see a few spots of light rain in towards the Banff and Buchan coast, up towards Caithness and Orkney. Shetland probably escaping actually dry for most of the day. Rest of the afternoon into the evening, that weather front then clears and long clear spells, so a chilly night Tuesday to Wednesday. And there, Wednesday, high pressure sitting overhead, so dry and fine. But take a look at the air mass graphic and you can see as that cold front has cleared through, the air is just that wee bit cooler. So it's a bright and sunny day on Wednesday, bit of cloud here and there, but temperatures down a notch or two. But the May sunshine is strong, so 17 degrees still possible. And high pressure staying with us throughout the rest of the week, so plenty of fine weather in the forecast. And that is the forecast for now.
Thank you very much, Christopher. And now, a reminder of tonight's main news. As the United States opens its new embassy in Jerusalem, Palestinian officials say that Israeli forces have shot dead over 50 protesters in Gaza. More than 2,000 Palestinians are reported to have been injured. And Nicola Sturgeon met celebrity chef Jamie Oliver as she announced plans to halve rates of childhood obesity by 2030. The First Minister says the Scottish Government will look at a range of ways to tackle the problem. Almost a third of school children here are classified as overweight. And that is Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with the late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Join me for that if you can. Until then, from all the team, good evening.